Hello again, my name is Rodney Reynolds and welcome to another video review. Today I will be looking at the Abit BD7-RAID Motherboard. What's included in this motherboard is the manual and the software as well as the drivers, included both on a disk as well as a CD. Also right here we have a supporting base. This is basically for the Pentium 4 cooler. Also included are the cables that are required. And you also have included here a game port which goes plugged directly into this motherboard. This motherboard does come with onboard audio and of course the motherboard itself. Let me now go over this motherboard into further detail. This motherboard of course is the Intel 845 based chipset. It takes the Pentium 4 478 pin CPU. There are power connectors on this motherboard. You will need a certified Pentium 4 power supply to be connected to the board. One connection is right here. There's another power connection right here. It takes two pieces of memory. DDR memory, you can have up to 2 gigabytes of memory on this board. You have a floppy connector right here. You have your ATA 100, 66, and 33 hard drive connectors right here. Right here you have the ATA 133 connectors or your RAID configuration. Something very distinctive about this motherboard is it does have a reset and power switch right on the board. Also it has what's called a post code display. Post stands for power on self test. And of course depending on what's displayed here you could reference that to your manual. Right here is where you begin connecting the case to the motherboard itself. Things like your speaker, reset buttons, as well as power on LED lights and things like that. Also has a built-in speaker. A lot of boards these days do have that as well. Also you have an AGP slot and you have 6 PCI slots on this motherboard. You have places right here to connect your sound from your CD-ROM drive. Of course, there is audio on this. Certainly nothing special on this board. It's just a 2-channel audio system. Also on this board, you have places to plug in fans. You have one right here, one over right here, and also one down right here. Right here is where you would be plugging in your keyboard, your mouse. You have 3 USB ports right here on the board. Also right here you have your LPT port. Things like your printer can go plugged in here. You have your 2 COM ports right here, and also your audio is right here. As I mentioned before, this is what's called a supporting base. What it is basically a base, a plastic base, which goes connected directly onto the motherboard itself. And then, of course, once that is installed and connected, you simply go ahead and slide on your cooler, your heatsink, and clamp it down, and of course you're ready then to plug the other things into this motherboard and get things up and running. Let me now have a look at the BIOS here. First I'll look at the soft menu 3 setup. Within here you can go in and select whatever CPU that you have. In my case I'm using a 1.6 gigahertz CPU. You can go ahead and do this. This is more of an automatic setting, or you can go in here and just select user defined, where you can then select the front side bus, also the front side bus ratio. There's a multiplier, of course. You cannot change this multiplier on the Pentium 4 Intels. You can also do a memory frequency. This is kind of a neat little feature because what it can do, if you have it set, let's say to 100 right here, you can of course then in essence get 133 if you go 4 over 3, which is basically 1.33 times the front side bus at the top. So that's a good feature to really get good performance out of your memory. As well here at the bottom we have voltage settings for both the memory and the CPU, and of course you can go all the way up here to around a 1.65. Also in here, a very common to all BIOSes is the standard CMOS features. Of course in here you would set the time, the dates, and your hard drives and your floppy drives. Next thing here is the advanced BIOS feature. In here such things as the virus warnings, enable or disable the CPU L1 and L2 cache. You can of course select the first boot, second boot, third boot, and the other boot devices. Also down here of course is very standard to a lot of BIOSes these days. Next thing here is the advanced chipset features. Within here you can go in and adjust your memory timings, among other things like system BIOS cacheable. You can go ahead and adjust the video BIOS cacheable as well as the video RAM cacheable. These things out here are very common. What's kind of neat is that you can go in here and select just an automatic setting, so to speak, by speed. You can also go in here and do a manual setting. Let's say you want a CAS latency time of 2 and you want to force these to 2 and 2. You can go ahead and do that manually, so you can get some more performance out of your memory than just by selecting the by speed. Also in here we have the integrated peripherals. Again, this is extremely common to all kinds of BIOSes these days. You can enable or disable your onboard IDE 1, IDE 2. Of course, in here you can select your USB controllers. You can also go ahead and select the audio, whether you want it on or off. Also down here you can go ahead and enable or disable your RAID. At the very bottom left here we have the plug-and-play PCI configurations. This is a very common area to many BIOSes these days. At the top right here we have what's called the PC health status. Got a few little neat features in here. You can adjust the fan. If the fan does fail, it will alarm. You can also shut down the system if the fan fails, so you can enable or disable those features. You can also set a temperature for the CPU. If it reaches a certain temperature, you can tell it to shut down the system. Very important, certainly if your fan does stop, or if a lot of dust does get in your fan and maybe your system does heat up. Also, there's a warning, so before it does shut down, it will give you a warning. But that shutdown is good, because if you're not around, certainly it will shut down your system automatically for you, saving your CPU. Let me now show you some Pci Sandra results. This is the standard version that is downloadable from their website, the current version. Let me now punch up the CPU benchmark. As you'll notice here, of course, mine is at the top. The reading is 3063. If you compare that to a Pentium 4 2 GHz, mine is a 1.6. The 2 GHz is 3688. Now, if you compare that to an Athlon XP 1800, you're looking at 4240. So, very much higher when it comes to the Athlon compared to the 1.6. If we go on here to the CPU Multimedia Benchmark, my result was 6241, a Pentium 4 2 GHz 7875, an Athlon XP 1800 at 8370. Going on here, we can look at the file system benchmark. The result that I got was 32042. This is really dependent on how you set the RAID up, depending on what kind of application that you want to use with your RAID. Mine is a RAID 0. I'm using two ATA 17220 gigabyte Maxter drives. Finally here, let's look at the memory benchmark. Now remember, this is an Intel 845 chipset, and it's not an Intel 850. The Intel 850 takes the RAM bus PC 800 memory. If you compare the results here, the result that I got was 1975. Now, if you compare that to much faster memory into the Intel 850, you get a result of 2450. So there isn't a huge difference here, which is certainly good news for the Intel 845 chipset. Abit has done a great job on this motherboard. Consider these things. You have RAID on board. It does support ATA 133. Also has audio on board. Also has the post displays. You can go in there and see what kind of error you're having, or just monitor it to see what's going on exactly when you're booting up the system. Also, of course, it comes with the power and reset switches right on the board. This is a fantastic feature, certainly good for when you have the motherboard out of your case. Also, of course, it comes with the standard soft menu 3, which is great because you can go in the BIOS and you can adjust things like your front side bus, your voltages on your memory, the voltages on the core. You also got some tweakings on the memory in there as well. Considering all those facts, well, consider one more. Intel has recently released a new CPU. The new Pentium 4 Intel CPUs come with 512K cache. From a lot of reports, the 1.6As and the 1.8As, most of them, not all,